Thank you, Fong. Hello everybody. Welcome to this informal webinar on strengthening national implementation of the Biological Weapons Convention. My name is Daniel Feeks. I'm the head of the Implementation Support Unit of the Biological Weapons Convention. It's great to have you all with us again today. It's been a busy week. I appreciate you spending your time with us. Many of you were also in the workshop that we had on Tuesday lunchtime. Some of you also in the informal consultations on BWC that we had on Tuesday morning. So many thanks to those of you who are attending your third BWC meeting during the course of this week. We've had over 250 people registering for this meeting. We currently have around about 130 online right now. So thank you very much for all of you in your various different time zones for spending time with us today. This is the first informal webinar in the second series of such webinars that we're organizing on topics to be discussed by the BWC meetings of experts, which we hope will be taking place later this year. The presentations that you'll be listening to, that you'll be seeing later on during this webinar, are on topics falling under the meeting of experts on strengthening national implementation, MX3, as we know it for short. I just wanted to, before I hand over to the chair of MX3, just quickly run through some of the kind of rules of the webinar. Many of these you'll be well familiar with by now, having spent a year at least attending online meetings. But obviously, please, when you join the meeting, can you have your microphones muted throughout? If you have any comments or questions to the speakers after the presentations, or actually even while they're speaking, you can write your questions, your comments in the chat function, which you find down at the bottom of the screen. Questions will be submitted privately, and we'll try and put as many questions as we can to the panelists in the Q&A session. If you do want to take the floor, and we would like to make this a little bit more interactive than we did with the first series of webinars. So if you would like to actually take the floor and ask a question directly, again, please do that via the chat function and request the floor, specifying your name and your affiliation. The webinar is being recorded. I hope that's okay with everybody, but we really want to be able to reach as many people as we can. So if people can't attend, they can at least watch it later via our website, where it will be, the recording will be posted along with the presentations themselves as well. So I'd like to stop there. I'd just like to thank all of my colleagues in the Implementation Support Unit who have made the organization and hosting of this webinar possible from a technical point of view. And obviously, thanks also to all of the presenters that you'll be hearing from during the next 90 minutes or so as well. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to the chair of MX3 and the moderator for this webinar today, Mr. Arman Baisuanov from Kazakhstan. Arman, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome you to the second series of webinar in which we will informally discuss the topics to be considered by the members of meetings of experts, and namely today, the meeting of experts on strengthening national implementation. It is an honor for me to be working with other office holders under the wise guidance of our MSP chairperson, Ambassador Cleopa Mailo of Kenya. Please allow me also to express my gratitude to the BWC Implementation Support Unit for organizing this virtual webinar. Moreover, I would like to extend my compliments to the distinguished speakers for agreeing to contribute to our discussion today. We, the MSP chair and all MX chairs, hope that the second series of webinars will generate fruitful discussions on achieving the common goals of this intersessional program of the BWC. I hope that today's informal deliberations will further highlight areas of convergence for consideration at our forthcoming meetings of experts in September and trigger new proposals. While the current crisis is of public health nature, it has impacted the BWC community, as many of our national experts usually participate in the MXS are on the front line fighting the pandemic. Allow me to reiterate my appreciation and support for their efforts. Moreover, the current crisis has also impacted our substantive discussions. As I already underlined at our previous webinar, preventing and prohibiting biological weapons requires the development, adoption, and implementation of a robust and holistic national strategy, addressing biological threats in a single and coordinated manner. Notably, an effective national implementation strategy will include essential elements such as biosafety and biosecurity measures, a robust legal framework to implement them, provisions regarding international cooperation, as well as a competent national focal point that can effectively coordinate all these measures. State parties can also work on these components at the regional level with their neighbors and peers, as we will also hear about during this webinar. Regional cooperation often brings significant advantages as states may have similar legal systems or share a common language. Regional organizations can also play an important catalyzing role in such endeavors. Another important component of national implementation that has attracted much attention from state parties are confidence-building measures, or CBMs. Many of you have requested further discussions on this important topic. Being the driving force of transparency and trust building in the BWC, CBMs have been highlighted at previous meetings of experts on strengthening national implementation. Many state parties have commended the role of CBMs in building trust, raising awareness, strengthening confidence, and reducing potential ambiguities. It is also useful to anticipate issues that may require oversight at national, regional, and international levels in the future. We will hear about one such issue later on and about ways in which it could be addressed. As you can see from our agenda, which hopefully has been distributed to all of you, we have 4 presentations today. The first presentation on advances of a competent authority as a national contact point for BWC will be delivered by a representative of Kenya. The second presentation, Confidence Building Measure G, Declaration of Vaccine Production Facilities, identifying additional relevant facilities, will be presented by a representative of the United Kingdom on behalf of a group of states. Third presentation, role of Africa CDC in supporting the Biological Weapons Convention implementation in Africa, will be presented by a representative of Africa CDC. And finally, the fourth presentation, developing an international common mechanism for DNA synthesis screening, will be presented by a group of international and non-governmental experts. Presentations will be followed by a Q&A session during which we will have opportunity to exchange our opinions and ask questions to the panelists. If there are no proposals from participants on the content of our agenda today, and without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Dr. Mary Onsarigo is a senior analyst at the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation, abbreviated as NACOSTI, in Kenya. Dr. Onsarigo will present NACOSTI as BWC National Contact Point, share best practices, as well as discuss challenges it faces during the implementation of the convention. Her presentation will also touch upon CBMs and their preparation and submission by NACOSTI. Dr. Onsarigo, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. His Excellency Ambassador Cleopas Mailu, Chair of, that is the Chair of Meetings of Experts, 2020-2021. The Chair of MX3, Your Excellency Aman, the Implementation Support Unit, Chief, Staff Daniel, and all the delegates, I take this opportunity to appreciate the chance that I've been given and opportunity to make a presentation on Kenya's situation in regarding to the BWC implementation measures. And one of that will be focusing on the CBMs. So thank you, I continue. Please move to the next slide. So my presentation will take this outline. I will just give a very brief background on how Kenya acceded and the participation of Kenya in BWC related activities. Then come into the focus area, Kenya National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation being a focal point. And also look at how, what is the enabling environment within NACOST that has allowed the institution to implement some of the measures under BWC. And also this gives me an opportunity also to give the experiences, observations and the challenges and the way forward that we have suggested. The next slide. So this is just an overview that Kenya acceded to BWC on the 7th of January 1976. And this was even before the Science and Technology Act was in place. This because that happened in 1977, just a year after. And since that time up to 2008, Ministry of Foreign Affairs remained to be the national focal point for the BWC. Next. So since then, Kenya has been able to participate in several activities. What I've just put on the slide is just a few examples. And this is just, other than the participation, it has also received a lot of support in terms of projects in strengthening either like laboratories in Kenya, which I have not placed down here. But as we can see, Kenya has been involved actively in organizing within the African region a workshop on the UN 1540, focusing on biosafety and biosecurity, and this was in 2010. Also, Kenya, the recent one was last year under the universalization webinar for African states, that is March 2020. And also Kenyan experts have been sponsored through BWC, attending at least 7 different meetings, and this is the year 2016, 2018, and 2019. And I will not forget to mention the latest webinar we had in this year, April 1st, where we organized a national stakeholders meeting targeting specifically the national stakeholders on confidence building measures. This was assisted very much by the implementation support unit. Next. So I placed this slide just to give an overview of how Kenya is able to implement some of the measures under the BWC. So this is because Kenyan laws have relevant sections that allow us to implement, even if we don't have a whole legal framework under BWC. But these sections allow us to implement some of the measures. First, we start with the Constitution of Kenya 2010. It provides that any laws or any treaties or conventions that Kenya has ratified or acceded to will form part of our laws. And because of that, most of our international law conventions or treaties are domesticated, basing the legal framework we have been given under the Constitution. So having in mind that, we have then different legislations, like the Biosafety Act 2009 It focuses on biosafety of genetically modified organisms, and it is much of the safety, though not security, but still that is a component of BWC. The Health Act 2017 also looks at the pathogens within the health sector. Animal Diseases Act also focuses on the diseases within the sector. We have Plant Protection Act. We have Pest Control Products, which is a regulator that regulates all the pesticides and herbicides that come into the country. And Occupational Safety Health Act 2007, it guards the workers under the occupational safety on any other diseases that they may attract or dangers, more specifically those who are working within the laboratories. Then we have the Science, Technology and Innovation Act 2013, where NACOSTE is one of the institutions that was established under that act. Then alongside we have the subject legislations which go along with those acts that I've mentioned. Next. So coming now to the focus, that is the Science, Technology and Innovation Act 2013, and there was a revised version of 2014. So this established NACOSTE as a state corporation, and within this act, the relevant sections to BWC. Section 6.1, it states the functions of the commission. Section 9.1, it establishes advisory committee. Section 12.1 and 3, research licensing and clearance. Section 16.1, establishment of research institution. So coming down to the functions, to effectively undertake this mandate, the ST&I Act under Section 6.1 assigns 17 functions, which can broadly be summarized as advisory, regulation, coordination, and promotion. So just to give an example of one of those functions where the BWC is relevant, it is function A. That is to develop in consultation with stakeholders the priorities in scientific, technological, and innovation activities in Kenya in relation to the economic policies and the government and the country's international obligations. So this gives us the mandate of handling most of the international commitments made by the government so that we fulfill on behalf of the government. And BWC is one of those international commitments the government of Kenya has committed itself to. Next. So the advantages of NACOSTE as a focal point for BWC. Looking at the Act, which gives it a full mandate to participate in this convention. Section 6.1a, which gives the functions, and this includes, as I've mentioned, the international commitments that are found within the STN by the government. So there are other several commitments that the Kenyan government has committed to, and as we go along, you'll see some of those areas where still NACOSTE is a focal point. And also Section 9.1, establishment of advisory committees. This allows NACOSTE to establish specialist national committees on matters of science. Biosecurity, National Biosecurity Committee is one of such, and it gets the mandate nationally, and it is able to advise the government on what is going on the ground. Section 12.1 and 3, NACOSTE is mandated to license research and clearance. We receive all the proposals for research in the country, and that gives us an overview of what is going on within the country. We can be able to use this to follow up what kind of research is taking place in whichever institution. And that is accompanied by the Section 16.1, where NACOSTE is allowed to establish new institutions, more specifically the research institutions. And because of that, we oversight and monitor their activities. So these, as you can see, the above provisions give NACOST the powers to competently coordinate, advise, and request information regarding BWC, especially when it comes to research information, the research laboratories, and that is what we gather when we are filling the CDMs. The next slide. So being a focal point, as I mentioned, it is not only BWC, but NACOST is also a focal point for comprehensive test ban treaty. This is more related with the IEA. We have also the African Regional Cooperative Agreement for Research, Development and Training related to nuclear science and technology, still fronted by IEA. Then we have the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology from Italy. Then close home, we have the East African Science and Technology Commission, just to, this is among others. So next. So coming back to the subject, the Biological Weapon Convention, as indicated earlier, that between 1976 and 2008, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was the focal point. Just by virtue of that, all the international treaties, conventions, they are domiciled in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it is in 2008, after the experts meeting, that that out of that meeting, it was felt that this focal point should be moved into the scientific community. And 2009, this function was transferred to then referred to as National Council for Science and Technology, which was under the Ministry of Education. So NCST is a predecessor of NACOST after the review of the 1977 Act. So in 2013, when the Science Act, this Act was revised into the Science, Technology and Innovation Act 2013, then NACOST inherited all the mandate and expanded more of the previous institution. But it is just one and the same thing, is only that now NACOST is a bigger institution. It is now has more mandate as compared when it was a council. So during that time, 2009, NCST established a National Biological and Toxin Weapon Committee, and under that committee, it was given the following TORs. One was to draft a biosecurity policy and bill, also represent Kenya at the meetings of experts, prepare statements for meetings of states parties, coordinate the submission of confidence building measure forms, organize any other activity related to BWC. And what is to be noted is that the drafted biosecurity policy and bill, which was initiated in 2010, it has never been concluded just because of internal organizations. So the next slide, please. So as an overview, the roles of NACOST as a BWC focal point. The Director General of NACOST is the national focal point for BWC. And one of those roles is leading the national implementation. At the same time, he coordinates the national implementation of the convention. We have the mandate of coordinating. We coordinate all institutions that are as an aspect of science, technology, and innovation. And given that much of the BWC is biased more to the science, technology, and innovation, so it becomes very easy to coordinate some of these institutions and even government departments. He also communicates with other state parties and relevant international organizations on behalf of the government. Because of the mandate, we have those international commitments. So as long as that treaty or convention has been acceded or ratified by the Kenyan government, and it is under the Science, Technology and Innovation. NACOST is given the mandate to communicate or even to make sure that those obligations are met. Then the other one is to prepare and submit the confidence building measures. Then the other one is facilitates information exchange of universalization efforts. Next. So just having in mind the mandate of NACOST. So what NACOST has done, just because of its mandate, has mapped all the national agencies with the roles that are relevant to BWC. So we have different categories of agencies. One, we have the regulatory agencies, and these are those that have pieces of legislations that touch on the BWC. We have the National Biosafety Authority, we have the Pest Control Products Board, we have the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, we have the National Environment Management Authority, we have Kenya Bureau of Standards. So this is just to mention a few under the regulatory services. So at least they have a piece of legislation that touches BWC. And under research institution and in universities, all the research institutions are supposed to be registered by NACOST, and all universities are public and private. So to just mention a few of the research institutions, we have the Kenya Medical Research Institution, we have the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization, we have Institute of Primate Research. Remember, one of our mandate is to establish research institutions, and the first two they were actually established under the 1977 Act. So what NACOST is required to do under the new Act is just to go and validate their existence. So they are still under the NACOST mandate. And then all the public and private universities, because of the research aspect, NACOST has all the mandate to monitor and also to evaluate the type of research that is undergoing. Next. The other class of national agencies, we have departments of ministries, we have Kenya Wildlife Service, and we understand some of the diseases that, some of the pathogens covered under BWC are those that cause zoonotic disease. So Kenya Wildlife Service, it is one of those agencies that we work closely because of the wildlife and the human interaction. So these pathogens can move across. We have the Directorate of Veterinary Services, which is a regulatory agency that is taking care of the pathogens within the animal. We have the Customs and Border Control Department. This oversees the export and import of all the strategic commodities. We have the government chemist, which receives biological samples for prosecution purposes. And we have the National Public Health Laboratories. These are laboratories under the Ministry of Health, and they are spread across the country. And this currently, like what we are going through the COVID-19, all the samples of the suspects are collected under the National Public Health Laboratories, and then they are taken to Kenya Medical Research Institute for screening. Then we have KEVAPI, it is a Kenya Vaccine Development Institute. So we have, this is the standalone vaccine production unit that we have, and this one focuses mostly on animal vaccines. Then, but for humans, Kenya Medical Research takes care of that. Then the other agencies is the ministry and security agencies. So the Ministry of Education, that is where NACOST is domiciled, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because it is the custodian of all the conventions and treaties. Then we have Office of the Attorney General, because of the legal issues under these conventions and treaties. We have also the National Intelligence Service, which assists the country on the intelligence information on the aspects of BWC. Then we have the Directorate of Criminal Investigation in case there is any culpable person, though we don't have a regulation in hand that can convict any person, because the pieces of laws that are there may not allow any person to be convicted if they were found guilty. Next. So coming to the implementing of CBMs. So once NACOSTI had mapped the various agencies that are responsible, then I can just give a brief history that Kenya submitted the first CBM form in 2010. And this is when, you remember the history, that the focal point moved from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to National Council for Science and Technology, which then, that was 2009. And the following year, which was 2010, the first CBM was submitted. And since then, we have submitted a total of 9. We missed out in 2013, 2017, and 2018. This was just due to institutional transitions. But you can see the country has been more consistent in submitting the CBMs. So NACOSTI, having mapped and identified institutions and linked them with different responsibilities relevant to BWC, then it has already a database of all these universities and research institutions, and also for some agencies. So it is very easy to communicate the hierarchy of information flows very fast within a very short time. So it is very easy now to collect information and monitor and research activities given the mandate of NACOST. Then the way we collect information, we do formal letters to the heads of institutions and universities. Then a CBM form is attached, and different institutions are requested to give information. So we do much of it via emails, but sometimes we give hard copies, especially those that are away from the cities, because they may be having a lot of problems with the internet. So we do send hard copies, and we give instructions on which form to fill. So confirmation of receipt of the forms is made by phone calls to the agencies, and also when a hard copy is sent, there is a return of that it has been formed. There's a confirmation of receipt of the letter, so that allows us to confirm that actually that form has arrived within the institution. Then NACOSTI sometimes collects this information by having face-to-face visits. So in some institutions which are within our reach, we're able to go there physically, assess the information they are giving us, as we also collect the same. Next. So this is just an overview of how we have organized the CBM form and the instructions we give to different institutions. So when we are sending the letters or the request to universities, research institutions, and the national public laboratories, we direct them to fill those sections: CBM A Part 1, CBM B, CBM C, and CBM G. Then when it is regulatory agencies and ministry departments, we target, because these are just to deal with the legislations, regulations, and other guidelines, we instruct them to fill CBM E. Security agencies also are instructed to fill CBM A Part 1 and Part 2, and also Part F. So because not all organizations have their awareness level is still low, so this allows them to at least have a direction where, on what information that is required, and which section of the form they need to fill. Next. And this is a very exciting slide, because it is just last month when we had a very excellent workshop And I've just, on top there, you can see the chair of the meetings of experts, His Excellency Dr. Cleopas Mailu. We have Daniel, we have our CEO, Walter Oyawa. So this happened on 1st April 2021. So the experience I can give here is that in 2021 submission of the CBM, Kenya has reported the highest number of BSL2 and BSL3. The other forms, because, and I think this would have been even higher, and we had this workshop earlier. You can imagine we had it on 1st April. We are supposed to submit this form by 15th April. So within that very short time, we were able to gather that much information. And I'm hoping this workshop has actually raised a lot of awareness to most of our stakeholders, because the number who attended are 100 officers from different institutions, that is 36. And so I think 2022 will be far, far much better than this year, given the time now that we had to fill in the form. On my right.
Mary, sorry for interrupting you. I think you are running out of your time limit.
Yes, I'm just finishing. Next, we move to the next slide. Yeah, so the observations that we made when we were receiving now the forms is that most of forms were returned without any filling. Others marked all the boxes on the first page. Others put names of their institution as the focal point, and others did not return at all. So these are gaps that now are very clear when we are doing our awareness, where to start from, so that it clearly shows that not everybody understood what is supposed to be done, and we need more awareness. Next, please. So the challenges, you can note that for 34 years, no CBM forms were submitted. That is when the focal point was under the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this could be attributed to the highly scientific, highly technical information that is required. So the capabilities in science and technology is of essence. Then awareness of the convention was still very low, and it is still very low. Research institutions and universities fear loss of business in the process of sharing such information. So most of them may want not to open up so much. The same also, it is attributed to the scientists fear that the convention is geared to participating the extent to which they can conduct research, and this is Article 1. So very few or almost nil participation by private institutions. Next. Yeah, so still here, we need to reach more of the relevant institutions. We have the parliamentarians, we have some research institutions which we have not been able to visit. We have the border control authorities. We have also biotechnology industries. We have realized that we don't have any private institutions participating, and those are the ones who have most of the industries. And also some national regulatory agencies and enforcement agencies whom we need to reach and fill some of those gaps. Next. So the way forward, we talk of strengthening the networking among the national agencies, and this is to enhance the mutual understanding and build confidence within the national stakeholders. So even within the country, that building of confidence is essential. It's not only across the state parties, but within the national agencies, they need to build confidence that the information we give, it is for the well-goodness of the country, and not to curtail their research. So also we need to carry out targeted sensitization of relevant institutions, which will enhance the understanding of the requirements and how to fill the forms. So we purpose to have at least one national workshop at least once a year, and also involvement of other state parties would enhance awareness of national stakeholders in CBM implementation. An example, it is the workshop that we had on 1st April, the UNODA and NACOSTI. Thank you. I think this is my last slide. Thank you.
Many thanks for your presentation, Dr. Ansariga. I think we have only 45 minutes left for 3 presentations. Well, I would advise all remaining speakers speak only for 10 minutes each, and then we will have 15 minutes for Q&A questions and answers. I'm happy now to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Amber Murch, who is a Senior Biological Advisor at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, which is part of the UK Ministry of Defence. As you will recall, at our first webinar last November, we had proposals from several state parties for improvements to the CBMs. These proposals are timely, given that the CBM forms have not been revised since 2011. In addition, the ICU had reported previously to MX3 that technical updates to the CBM forms should be considered by state parties. With the 9th review conference approaching, this is the perfect time for us to carefully study whether the CBM requires some revision. Therefore, I welcome Dr. March to present a joint proposal to enhance confidence building measure G that was jointly submitted to the 2019 meeting of experts by Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK. Dr. March, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and good afternoon, colleagues. So as the Chairman has just introduced, I will be outlining a potential reporting gap concerned with the interpretation of confidence building measure G, which is concerning the identification of relevant vaccine facilities. Next slide, please. So CBMG covers only vaccine facilities or vaccines produced on the territory of a state party or under its control, and which vaccines are licensed by that state party. However, pharmaceutical companies are increasingly outsourcing vaccine production processes, either in whole or in part, to contract manufacturers. So it is possible that such contractors could be located in a different country, and hence that the vaccine produced in their facilities might be licensed exclusively by the authority of another sovereign state. So given the wording of CBMG, in such cases, neither the state's party whose territory the production facility is located on, nor the state party which licenses the vaccine may feel obliged to declare that facility. So this is a potential reporting gap, and it means that CBMG may fail to capture all relevant vaccine production facilities. Next slide, please. So to outline this reporting gap or potential reporting gap, we have a case study from 2016, and the Swiss delegation brought to the attention of the UK delegation a vaccine called Vaxchora. This is a cholera vaccine manufactured by a company called Paxvax Bermuda Limited, and Paxvax Bermuda Limited is a UK registered company. The company was not currently registered on the UK CBM information gathering list. So the UK decided to undertake some investigation to explore whether it would be appropriate to make a declaration for this vaccine production facility on the UK CBM. Even if the vaccine was not licensed by the UK authority, for the sake of transparency, the UK delegation thought this may be the appropriate course of action. However, it turned out research through open source documents, such as those available from the FDA website, found that there was actually no manufacturing processing happening on the island of Bermuda. In addition, the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office also contacted the Ministry of Health in Bermuda, and the Ministry of Health in Bermuda confirmed that PaxVax was a registered company but was not licensed to conduct any manufacturing on the island. Therefore, since there was no production of the Vaxchora vaccine on UK territory, it would not be appropriate to make a declaration on Form G of the UK CBM. Further investigation also found that manufacture of the bulk drug for Vaxchora was contracted out by PaxVax to another company called Cinco Biopartners BV, and this company was based in the Netherlands. It was also found that the vaccine is licensed by the US government FDA, but obviously manufactured in the Netherlands. So under the current wording of CBMG, it would seem that the Netherlands would not necessarily be obliged to declare this facility, and it was clear that there was a potential reporting gap in this example. However, as part of the Netherlands' policy of transparency, their CBM submission in 2016 did include the Cinco Biopartners BV facility. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, implications, yes. So what does this mean for state parties to the BTWC? Although there is a potential reporting gap, this has been raised before in BTWC meetings. However, as it was the conference. Potentially even more apparent now in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, as facilities that fall between the wording of CBMG could actually be more widespread than state parties are aware of. And this is in part due to the sudden increase in vaccine production facilities for COVID-19 related vaccines. Next slide, please. Bearing all this in mind, the UK and our colleagues from other delegations will join us in calling upon states parties to do some things to improve the situation with this potential reporting gap. So we would call upon states parties to collaborate with each other on the identification of relevant vaccine production facilities that may be missed under the current CBMG wording. We would call upon states parties to adopt a similar policy of transparency to the Netherlands as demonstrated in the case study. And we would call upon states parties to follow the approach of declaring all known vaccine facilities on their territory or under their control, whether licensed by their own government authority or by that of another state. Next slide, please. Of this enhanced CBMG reporting that the UK has territory and granted marketing authority in the UK. However, a while ago, investigations into a site in Scotland for a company called Valneva indicated that this facility, which manufactures Japanese encephalitis vaccine, was manufacturing this vaccine was granted by another country, Valneva, Austria. production relevant to the BTWC could be missed by the narrow application of the current CBMG wording. So to sum up this example, the manufacturing authorization was granted by the UK, while the marketing authorization was managed by Valneva Austria. Next slide, please. Another example is that of Merck BioReliance Services. This company produces the active viral ingredient for an adenovirus vaccine at a manufacturing facility in Glasgow, Scotland. This is done on behalf of a US-based pharmaceutical company. This site is licensed and operates under a manufacturing authorization from the UK MHRA. However, the product is sent to the US client for further processing, and the US-based pharmaceutical company holds that previously found for the products manufactured on their sites. Both the licensing authorities and the holders of the marketing authorization were specified in each case, and information was also provided on other work undertaken at the facilities. However, such information usefully provides increased transparency of the wider range of activities taking place in declared facilities, and this can also broaden the scientific and technical knowledge as agreed in Article 10 of the BTWC. And with a similar approach to the Netherlands in 2016, and in the spirit of transparency, the UK CBMG declaration for 2018 included both the Valneva and Merck BioReliance Services facilities. And subsequent requests to the MHRA UK Licensing Authority now include information on UK vaccine production facilities that hold manufacturing authorization and marketing authorization. Next slide, please. So to sum up, if confidence building measure G is interpreted to the letter, then there may be vaccine production facilities that slip through the net and go undeclared in the CBMs. There have been several case studies so far which have highlighted this issue and have also shown ways of effectively reporting facilities that might have otherwise been missed. Collaboration was particularly key to ensuring facilities were declared. And we, the UK, hope that this presentation and the associated working papers have highlighted to states parties this potential reporting gap and also raised awareness about options for how to approach this issue. Next slide, please. And with that, I will close by thanking our colleagues in the delegations of the Netherlands, Switzerland and Sweden for collaborating with us on this important issue, and I will be happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. March. Next, we will hear from Dr. Tokmo Maruta, Senior Biosafety and Biosecurity Officer at the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Maruta, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak. And it is my pleasure to represent the Africa Centers for Disease Control, Prevention, and the team at Africa CDC. For the sake of time, allow me to observe all protocol and proceed with the presentation. As alluded to by the chair, I think one of the issues that has been a problem even in our region has to do with implementation of the Biological Weapons Convention as agreed by the member states in the several meetings and ratifications they've had. Sorry, there's just some feedback. Just give me a moment. Yes. So as you have noticed, the Africa Centers for Disease Control is a specialized African Union agency which was established to strengthen the capacity for our member states in terms of building their capacity for responding to any threats in the region. As you may know from recent evaluations that were done by the WHO, including the joint external evaluations that were done between 2016 and 2019, the Global Health Security Index, as well as many other objective assessments done in the region, it was apparent that our member states still lack capacity to respond to some of the potential catastrophic biological events whose risk continues to rise because of the magnified global travel, urbanization, terrorist interest in weapons of mass destruction, as well as the rapid advances in technology. In order to respond to that, the Africa Centers for Disease Control, in collaboration with its regional and international partners, launched the Biosafety and Biosecurity Initiative, whose main goal and aim is really to strengthen the biosafety and biosecurity capacity of our member states, such that they can then be able to comply with all these international regulations, some of which we are speaking to today, the BWC, also your HR of 2000, and the UN Security Council Resolution, especially 1540, and of course, the multi-country global health security, especially Action Package number 3. This initiative is being implemented broadly in 5 broad categories. One, looking at development of a biosafety and biosecurity legal framework for the Africa region. Secondly, looking at establishing a regional and continental biosafety and biosecurity technical working group, whose responsibility would be to coordinate and monitor implementation of this initiative. Thirdly, looking at establishing regional training and certification programs for biosafety and biosecurity experts, so that we can now begin to build the capacity of experts in biosafety and biosecurity and make it a professional career that people can pursue. And this will help us to implement many of the requirements for biosafety and biosecurity in the region. Fourthly, to establish a regulatory and certification framework for institutions that are handling high-risk pathogens. As you may agree with me, in our region, we have starting to have some of these high-risk, some of these institutions that are handling these high-risk pathogens coming up, either in research institutions, universities, private sector, non-governmental organizations, and government. But the government really does not have an inventory of who is keeping what. The government does not have an inventory of who and what are they keeping and in what quantities. Therefore, and also what regulations and standards are they complying to. We would like to come up with a framework where governments can then use to evaluate, to authorize some of these high-risk, these institutions that are handling high-risk pathogens by coming up with a framework that they can use. And of course, lastly, the importance of our national public health institutes and the network of national reference laboratories in terms of their capacitating them to be able to prevent, detect, and respond to events of public health importance. What is, with this initiative, we then decided that we need to put all these ideas into one place so that we can increase coordination amongst our member states as well as all our partners. We then developed the African CDC Biosafety and Biosecurity Initiative 5-year strategic plan, which begins in 2021 for the next 5 years. This strategic plan was really based on the objectives of the initiative that I've spoken about. Secondly, it is also based on the consultations that have been done since 2017 up to 2020 amongst our member states, where priorities for biosafety and biosecurity were then listed in collaboration with our partners. And when we put this together into the several priority areas, it then ensures better coordination in implementation of biosafety and biosecurity in the region. Of key importance is that even though we have this 5-year strategic plan housed and coordinated by Africa CDC, really it's a document that is open to be used by many of our partners. We are not asking everyone to put their resources within Africa CDC, but to give direction in terms of what are the priorities that have been raised by our member states in the region. And partners, including BWC Implementation Unit, can pick some of these activities and start implementing in the region. There's one particular area that I want to pick from the strategic plan. Of course, we have our enabling priority areas as well as operational areas, but it is here on the development of an Africa Union endorsed biosafety and security legal framework for use across our Africa Union member states. As alluded by the chair at the beginning, this is one of the critical elements of ensuring that we do have a conducive environment that allows for implementation of biosafety and biosecurity. And one means of doing that is ensuring that we have proper legislature within our member states. We therefore took it upon ourselves that we bring everyone together, develop this regional framework, which member states can either, if they already have something, they can use it to review and update what they have, or where they do not have, as in case of other member states, can adopt, and put this through their own national legislative processes. Now, the process of developing this framework has been, we followed a highly iterative and consultative process. We first of all, earlier last year, began by forming an advisory group of about 10 to 15 experts made up of African Union, Africa CDC, and some of our collaborating partners, really to coordinate the process and develop the first draft. We then went into the second phase where we did the regional consultations of our member states. As I indicated earlier on, Africa CDC is decentralized into 5 regions. We have formed these multi-expert and multi-sectorial technical working groups, and we use this platform to engage and consult member states on this legal framework. So we went through the meetings over 4 to 5 months, and we are happy to say we had about 80% participation of the member states. So they reviewed the document, made changes, updated the document, and went to the third phase where we brought all member states together, their representative, to now say, this is what you ask that to update. We would like you to review it, validate it before we take it to the next stage. We then called upon all the regional experts in an expert consultative meeting where their main mandate was to review and to validate the framework to ensure that it complies with some of the international requirements as well as some of the legal issues within member states. The next stage we are going into beginning this May is now to take this document through the Africa Union structures, starting with, of course, advocacy and communication, engaging influential people, ministers, member of parliaments, and so forth. Then it's going to go into the specialized technical committees within the Africa Union until it reaches the heads of states for their adoption and authorization. This legal framework is fine, but today I would like to zero in on one that relates to this meeting, where in this domain, it specifically speaks about prohibition of activities in the development, possession, and transfer of biological agents for the purposes of building weapons. And it speaks to several issues that will be very useful in ensuring that we can also support the implementation of the BWC together with your implementation support unit. So it really speaks to the country needs to make sure that within their legislations, they do have issues that speaks to prohibition to develop, to produce, to stockpile, otherwise acquire or retain or use biological agents and toxins that have no justification for proliferation, protective, or other peaceful purposes. Talks about many other things and also refers to if one violates, what is it that should be done to that agents within the country. And of course, some form of assistance and offenses that can be enforced. So it really gives details in this when you go through the actual framework. Now, looking in addition to just creating an environment that is conducive to ensure that the requirements for BWC can be implemented, there are other areas as Africa CDC we can work together to support implementation at country level. One of these is working together with your support unit to work with member states to adapt or adopt this regional biosafety and biosecurity legal framework. There are several things that we need to do. working together. One, we need to assist member states to review what they currently have as legislation, which then can inform the next steps. Are they going to adapt what is available if there's nothing? Are they going to review and update what they have so that it complies with what we have agreed? Of course, there will be need for training and helping them to draft national legislation in alignment. And lastly, looking at supporting member states, of course, in the process of ratification of the BWC. As alluded in the introduction, there are still some countries that have not done so. Also assisting you through our legal structures and official channels within the AU, the nomination of national focal persons has just presented very elaborately the roles and responsibility of this national focal person, which will help, especially in the implementation. And of course, helping to build the advocacy, the awareness, as well as training and capacity building of these national focal persons, civil society, academia, and many other stakeholders that are key and critical in the implementation of the requirements for WC. This, Chair, are the areas that the Africa CDC is working on in terms of the biosafety and biosafety initiative, and some of the areas we propose that we could work together to support implementation of BWC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maruta, for sharing information on this very commendable initiative. Now allow me to introduce our three next speakers from the World Economic Forum and Nuclear Threat Initiative. We'll make a joint presentation on developing an international common mechanism for DNA synthesis screening. In recent years, DNA synthesis technologies capable of printing pathogens or toxin DNA have become widely available, and in the near future, the availability of synthetic DNA around the world significantly expand. A global approach to prevent the deliberate and accidental misuse of these technologies is currently lacking. So I would invite Dr. Jamie Yassif, Ms. Elisa Piche, and Dr. Nicole Wille to speak on this topic. You have 10 minutes, please.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining our discussion today and for the invitation to share our work with this esteemed group of experts and diplomats. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. So yes, we'll be speaking about our joint work between the World Economic Forum and NTI to develop better tools and best practices for DNA synthesis screening. NTI is an organization, it's an international security organization based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to transform global security by driving systemic solutions to nuclear and biological threats imperiling humanity. And we're going to focus on the bio aspect of our work today. And we're pleased to say that we are celebrating 20 years of our organization this year. And so we've been doing this work for quite some time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Great, thank you. So as part of our work in this space, we recognize that rapid advances in global biotechnology and bioscience offer tremendous benefits and potential to improve human health, to improve pandemic preparedness, and to drive economic development. But we also recognize that these very same advances also pose unique risks. And through our work at NTI and in partnership with the World Economic Forum, we're really focused on safeguarding the legitimate global bioscience and biotechnology enterprise to prevent it from being exploited for misuse for bioweapons purposes or other nefarious intent. And so, in our work specifically for DNA synthesis screening, our goal is to prevent the building blocks of dangerous pathogens from falling into the wrong hands, like non-state actors and other types of terrorists in particular. And a basic underlying fact that drives this work is that DNA and RNA are the building blocks for all life, including viruses and bacteria and other pathogens. And so there is currently DNA synthesis screening happening on a voluntary basis, but it has critical gaps in it, and we're working to strengthen that. And so the basic idea, if you're a scientist in a laboratory and you're going about your day-to-day research work, it's very common to order pieces of DNA. You put in your order over the internet, you order a gene of a varying length, It gets processed by the provider, either a company or a non-commercial provider, and it gets sent to you within a matter of days. And that's pretty standard. And these providers, most of them do screen on a voluntary basis, but not everyone does. And that's what we're really going to focus on today. Next slide, please. So the current state of play for DNA synthesis is it's getting faster and less expensive and more accurate over time. In the recent decades, the cost has decreased on an exponential basis, and it's possible to synthesize longer and longer pieces of DNA that are accurate for a manageable cost. And you can see that represented in the Carlson curves on the right in that chart. So this, the current industry is mostly centralized. There are a number of companies and other providers based in the United States, in Europe, and around the world, in China, elsewhere, and most of them screen. But in the near future, we're looking in the next 2 to 5 years, the model for DNA synthesis services is going to likely to change dramatically to include a decentralized DNA synthesis model. And the reason for that is that new technology is driving the development of benchtop synthesis devices. These are standalone machines that you can put on your benchtop or your tabletop, and they will make DNA for you at your laboratory instead of having to send away for it. Right now, there are not fully developed biosecurity safeguards in place to safeguard that, and so that's also part of the work and part of the challenge in this space. So as I said before, DNA synthesis screening is currently carried out on a voluntary basis. Our very rough estimates are that about 80% of global market share is screened and 20% isn't. A lot of this work is done by members of the International Gene Synthesis Consortium. There's a number of companies that voluntarily screen their orders and share best practices about how to do screening with each other. But DNA synthesis screening is not legally required in any country around the world. So I'm going to pause for a second and hand the floor over to my colleague, Alyssa Pritchett, who's going to share a little bit of the World Economic Forum perspective on this challenge.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alyssa Pritchett, and I work at the World Economic Forum on the platform for shaping the future of health and healthcare. We are very, very happy to have the opportunity to work with NTI and incredibly value our partnership to work on issues related to biosecurity and synthetic biology. The World Economic Forum established our centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution a few years ago, and biology is really at the core of the work we do. The Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution look at shaping the trajectory of new and frontier technologies, which are essentially technologies that merge the physical, the biological, and the digital worlds to shape our society. So through our work, what we are looking to do is shape the trajectory so that these frontier technologies grow in a way that is beneficial for society, and that we're able to amplify the positive innovations and ensure that they're deployed globally, as well as urgently identify and mitigate the risks that stem from these technologies. As part of our work, we also established the Global Future Council for Synthetic Biology in October last year, and the council is looking at what are the different ideal futures that can come from the synthetic biology space, and what are the questions, trade-offs, and decisions that policymakers need to consider in realizing these idealized futures within the framework of global values, touching on solidarity, equity, sustainability, and humility. Essentially, what we're thinking about is, now that we can engineer the living world, what kind of world is it we want to create? And it's been a wonderful experience working with NTI on answering that question, particularly from the perspective of biosecurity, innovation, and risk reduction. One of the first milestones we reached with NTI was at our annual meeting in Davos back in January 2020, where multiple stakeholders came together to release this report that you see pictured on your screen, looking to create a global framework for accessible, safe, and secure DNA synthesis. Within the report, the key recommendations were to establish a technical consortium to develop a common mechanism for DNA synthesis screening, as well as to establish a normative entity to conduct oversight and to help establish global norms. To talk more about what it is we've accomplished together, I'm going to hand it back to Jamie.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. So as Alyssa mentioned, we jointly published this report in January of last year. And since that time, we have worked together in a very focused manner to try to bring our recommendations from that report into a reality. And since that time, we've convened 2 meetings of our International Technical Consortium, one in May of 2020 and one just last week. And the vision was developing a common mechanism that could provide a baseline capability for DNA providers. So a tool that any DNA synthesis provider could use to meet minimum standards that they could use anywhere in the world, and where we've made a lot of progress in partnership with the experts that are members of our technical consortium. And now we basically have design parameters. We've designed a common mechanism. We've developed technical specifications, and we're about to pivot towards development and testing. Another important development was in September of 2020, NTI and the World Economic Forum jointly convened a meeting to talk about the bigger picture and the institutional architecture for biosecurity to sort of shape how the world moves forward together to manage risks associated with rapid advances in bioscience and biotechnology, to create that ideal future that Alyssa was talking about. And this group came to the conclusion that there are really critical gaps in the global biosecurity architecture, and they could be addressed through the creation of a global normative entity that's focused on developing better and more robust biosecurity norms that we can agree on globally, and developing effective pilot projects for finding ways to implement those norms. Next slide, please. So since we have launched the technical consortium, we've been focused on three key areas. One is sequence screening, so figuring out when people send in an order, what sequences should be flagged, what should go through and what shouldn't. And so we're really looking at biological risks that are known to us or sequences that are within regulated pathogens. Another important element of synthesis screening is screening the customer, not just the order. And so there are important questions we're looking at in terms of how do you figure out who's a legitimate customer for these materials. If there is a piece of DNA that's been flagged as sort of a questionable order, what is legitimate use of such DNA and who gets to decide that? And then finally, how do we apply customer screening and sequence screening to this, to the benchtop device future that we're looking to see in the next 2 to 5 years? How do we make sure that we can, that the distributed DNA synthesis will continue to maintain standards for biosecurity and biosafety? Next slide. And I'm going to hand the floor over to my colleague, Nicole Wheeler, who's been really driving the technical elements of this work. Nicole, over to you.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to breeze through the technical details of this because of how we're doing with time. If you want more information about any of this, please do get in touch with us. Our contact details will be at the end of this presentation. So this kind of shows an overview of the overall screening process, which essentially breaks down into 4 steps. There are customer screening elements shown in orange and DNA screening elements as well. So first we do some screening when you onboard a new customer. And then for each order that's placed, some screening of the order characteristics is performed. There's also an examination of the DNA being ordered to see if it poses a potential hazard. And if it does, there's some additional screening of these flagged orders. Next slide, please. Cool. So here's an outline of the DNA sequence screening component of the mechanism. The flowchart here is quite complicated, but essentially it boils down to 2 questions. Firstly, does the DNA that's being ordered encode a known hazard like a toxin? And if not, does the DNA that's being ordered more closely resemble a regulated pathogen than anything else? And if so, what does that DNA do? So If a known hazard is encoded or a sequence looks like it could pose a hazard and is from a regulated pathogen, these will be flagged for further analysis. Next slide, please. So this outlines some of the customer screening that goes on as part of the mechanism. The first part of screening is during customer onboarding, where the company needs to establish what kind of customer they're dealing with and whether it's legal and safe to be doing business with them. So this can include some core components like checking the customer against relevant international watch lists. And this is the watch list checking is an ongoing process that happens throughout the customer relationship as well. The next bit of customer screening goes on during order processing when a customer places an order. Here we'd be looking for any order characteristics that might raise concerns, like the customer wanting to pay in cash or wanting to send the order to a location that isn't related to their institutional affiliation. Finally, if DNA is flagged for posing a potential hazard, there'll be more investigation of whether the customer is qualified and equipped to work with that potential hazard and whether they have a good reason to. Next slide, please. Finally, as Jamie pointed out, there's a new generation of benchtop devices which customers could use within their own lab in a decentralized and largely unsupervised way. Because these technologies operate with a lot less oversight, we wanted to be a bit more conservative with these screening elements. So being a bit more careful about what kind of customer could purchase a device like this, and also being a bit more limited in what kinds of sequences the device could produce. So essentially any DNA that matches a known hazard will not be produced, and any DNA that is more similar to a regulated pathogen, regardless of what function it might perform, is also not produced. But the customer does have the option of creating an exemption list with the device provider of sequences that would be flagged by these criteria, but that they have a good reason to be working with. And this exemption list can develop over time in a conversation with the company with appropriate checks in place to make sure that the customer has good reason to work with those sequences. If there are a number of requests to produce a sequence that are denied by the device and a certain threshold is reached, then the device itself would inactivate completely, because this could signal that the customer is trying to experiment with ways of getting around the screening. So if that condition was met, then the customer would need to go back to the device supplier and undergo a review of behavior on that device before they can keep using it. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the next steps for developing this mechanism are shown here. The first one is developing and testing an actual prototype of the screening mechanism to see how it performs. The second one is clarifying what are the roles of DNA providers in this process and of the normative entity that's going to be overseeing this process, which was introduced earlier in the presentation. And finally, we want to make sure that there are strong incentives in place to encourage international adoption of this common screening mechanism, and we're looking to enlist help in this process. We would certainly be very interested in input from you as a group about how we could go about this. Next slide, please. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's been involved in this development effort and getting us to the point we are today. And also thank you to everyone who's watching for your attention. We're very interested in hearing your questions and also your feedback. Next slide, please. So here are our contact details if you'd like some more information or you want to have a longer conversation about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, experts from WEF and NTI for your interesting presentation. I think we have time for a really brief Q&A session. Any quick reactions from delegations, from experts? Okay, in this case, let me express my appreciation to all speakers for their presentation and for addressing your questions. Not really addressing questions. Unfortunately, we have expended all the time available to us today, and I will now have to close this webinar. But before that, I need to stress that previous MX webinars have been very useful platforms for informal discussions. I hope our discussions here today will also generate ideas and contribute to consolidating proposals, promoting new ideas and initiatives in the view of the forthcoming MX3. As the 9th review conference is approaching, any opportunity to exchange views and further develop or refine ideas is welcome. As chair of MX3, I am open to hearing from state parties on the topic of the agenda of the meeting, particularly with a view to formal meeting in September and also with an eye to the 9th review conference. I would be very happy to organize informal consultations in advance of our meeting, discuss the topics on our agenda in more depth. I do hope that today's informal discussions have produced a tangible benefit for all participating delegations and experts. Together with ICU, we remain at your disposal for further discussions on these topics and would be happy to exchange further on the preparation for the forthcoming meeting of experts on strengthening national implementation. Have a good day and enjoy your weekend. Thank you. Time is up. And the webinar is over. Thank you very much to our panelists for your valuable insights and participation, and for to delegations for participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.